The millionaire's son invited the cleaner to a luxury restaurant with the intention of humiliating her. When his father found out, he taught him a lesson that brought him to his knees. Grant Thomas leaned back in his chair at the posh restaurant, a smug grin playing on his lips as he watched Lily Harper approach. She looked out of place amid the polished, gleaming decor, the crystal chandeliers casting a harsh light on her simple dress. Lily's eyes darted nervously around the room, her hands fidgeting with the strap of her worn-out purse. Grant's friends, seated around the table, exchanged knowing glances, their expressions filled with barely hidden amusement. "Grant, what's this about?" Lily asked, her voice barely steady. She had accepted his invitation against her better judgment, thinking perhaps there was a sliver of kindness behind his offer. But now, with their snickers and whispers, she felt the weight of a trap closing in. Grant gestured for her to sit, leaning forward with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Come on, Lily, have a seat. Order whatever you like. It's on me tonight," he said, his tone dripping with false generosity. She sat hesitantly, feeling the stares of the wealthy diners around them. As she reached for the menu, Grant's friends erupted into mocking laughter. "Make sure you can pronounce it, Lily," one of them taunted, setting off another round of laughter. Lily's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. She tried to focus on the menu, but the words blurred as tears stung her eyes. She realized then that this dinner wasn't about any genuine kindness. It was a spectacle for Grant and his friends, a way to make her feel small. As the waiter arrived to take their orders, Grant leaned back with a smug expression, clearly enjoying Lily's discomfort. He exchanged a wink with his friends, who raised their glasses in a mock toast to new experiences. He said, lifting his glass, his tone laced with sarcasm. Lily struggled to hold back her tears, forcing a tight smile. But just as the waiter began to pour the wine, a deep, authoritative voice cut through the laughter. "That's enough, Grant." The table fell silent as Richard Thomas, Grant's father, appeared beside them. He was a tall man with a commanding presence, his expression stern as he looked at his son. The laughter died on Grant's lips, and he straightened in his chair, his smug demeanor fading under his father's intense gaze. "Dad, Grant stammered, but Richard raised a hand, silencing him. "I've seen enough of this nonsense," Richard said, his voice cold. He turned to Lily, who looked up at him with wide, confused eyes. "Lily, you don't deserve any of this. Please, allow me to apologize for my son's behavior." Grant's friends exchanged nervous glances, suddenly aware that the mood had shifted. Richard's presence commanded respect, and no one dared to challenge him. Lily, unsure of what to do, nodded slowly, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you, Mr. Thomas." Richard's gaze hardened as he looked back at Grant. "You've embarrassed yourself and this family tonight, Grant. And more than that, you've shown a complete lack of respect for others." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "I think it's time you learned some humility." Grant's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. He had never seen his father so disappointed in him, and the realization stung. "You can't be serious," he muttered, glancing around at the curious onlookers. "Oh, I am," Richard replied firmly. He addressed the entire table, making sure everyone could hear. "From now on, you'll be working as a janitor alongside Lily for the next 6 months. Maybe then you'll learn what it means to earn your respect." Gasps of surprise rippled through the restaurant, and Grant's friends looked at him with a mix of shock and amusement. Grant's expression turned from anger to disbelief, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to process his father's words. "You can't make me do that," he protested, his voice barely more than a whisper. Richard's expression remained unchanged. "You'll do it, or you'll be cut off from the family's wealth. No more allowances, no more luxuries. Your choice." The weight of his father's ultimatum settled heavily on Grant's shoulders. He glanced at Lily, whose expression was a mixture of confusion and relief. For a moment, he saw the pain in her eyes, the humiliation she had endured because of his actions. And for the first time, A flicker of shame crossed his face. He swallowed hard, knowing he had no real choice. "Fine," he muttered through gritted teeth, looking down at the table. "I'll do it." Richard nodded curtly, then turned to Lily with a gentler expression. "Lily, I'm truly sorry for what you went through tonight. If you're willing, I'd appreciate your patience with Grant over the next few months." Lily, still processing everything, managed a nod. I'll do my best, Mr. Thomas." With that, Richard cast one last look at his son before leaving the restaurant, leaving Grant to face the aftermath of his own actions. The laughter and derision that had filled the room earlier now felt hollow, leaving only a tense silence. Grant looked around, seeing his friends for what they truly were: shallow, unkind, and unworthy of respect. As the night came to an end, Lily walked out of the restaurant, holding her head high despite the humiliation she'd endured. Behind her, Grant remained seated, staring at the empty plates and realizing that his life was about to change in ways he had never imagined. The next morning, Grant woke up in his luxurious bedroom, the events of the previous night swirling in his mind like a bad dream. He stared at the ceiling, trying to convince himself that his father's words were just an idle threat. But when he checked his phone, a single message from Richard confirmed his worst fears. "Your duties begin tomorrow. Be ready at 7 a.m. No excuses." Grant cursed under his breath, tossing the phone aside. He couldn't believe this was happening. Him, a janitor, working alongside the very woman he had tried to humiliate. The thought made his blood boil. He had always been the golden child, the one with endless opportunities. This was beneath him. Still, deep down, he knew his father's determination. Richard Thomas didn't make empty threats. If Grant didn't comply, the financial tap that supported his lifestyle would dry up instantly. He thought about the luxury car parked in the driveway, the private memberships, the vacations, everything he'd taken for granted. A chill ran down his spine as he realized how quickly those things could vanish. When he finally dragged himself downstairs, Richard was waiting for him in the study, a room filled with leather-bound books and the weight of old money. Richard looked up from his desk, his expression as stern as ever. "Grant, I trust you understand the gravity of your actions," Richard began, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You've embarrassed this family, and more importantly, you've treated another human being with absolute contempt. That is unacceptable." Grant clenched his jaw, refusing to meet his father's gaze. "I already said I'll do it, Dad. Do you really have to rub it in?" Richard's eyes narrowed. "You think this is about punishment? No, Grant. This is about learning. You've spent your entire life looking down on people like Lily, thinking you're better because of the money you were born into. It's time you see the world from a different perspective." Grant let out a bitter laugh, still struggling to accept the situation. "So, you think making me clean floors and empty trash cans is going to change me?" "It's not just about the work," Richard replied, his voice firm. "It's about understanding the value of respect and humility. And maybe, just maybe, you'll realize that real worth isn't measured in dollars." Grant shifted uncomfortably, the words hitting closer to home than he cared to admit. But he refused to let his father see any crack in his facade. "Fine, Dad. You win. I'll play along with your little lesson, but don't expect me to enjoy it." Richard shook his head, a trace of disappointment flickering in his eyes. "This isn't about enjoyment, Grant. It's about growing up." The following day, Grant arrived at the mansion's service entrance at 7 a.m. sharp, just as Richard had instructed. The sun was barely up, and the morning air was cold and still. He stood in front of the door, feeling utterly out of place in his designer jacket and polished shoes, surrounded by the unfamiliar hum of the early morning shift. Lily arrived moments later, carrying a bag filled with cleaning supplies. She looked surprised to see him there, her eyes scanning his attire with a hint of amusement. "You might want to change into something more practical," she said, her voice even, but Grant could sense the hint of sarcasm. He glared at her, but there was no fire behind it. He knew he deserved worse. "Yeah, whatever," he muttered, taking the plain uniform she handed him. It felt strange to wear something so simple, devoid of the labels and prestige he was used to flaunting. Lily led him through the mansion, showing him the tasks he would be responsible for. As they walked past the elegant halls and pristine rooms, Grant felt a knot of resentment in his chest. He had lived in this house all his life, but this side of it, the hidden corridors, the staff quarters, was a world he had never considered before. They reached the storage room where Lily handed him a mop and a bucket. "Let's start with the basics," she said, her tone all business. "The floors in the East Wing haven't been cleaned yet." Grant looked at the mop in his hands, feeling a surge of anger. He had never had to do anything remotely like this, but there was no way out, and he knew that Lily was watching him closely. He forced himself to start, dipping the mop into the soapy water and swiping it across the marble floor, feeling every ounce of humiliation with each stroke. Lily, to her credit, didn't gloat or taunt him. She just worked alongside him, moving quickly and efficiently, her focus entirely on the task. Grant couldn't help but notice the quiet determination in her movements, the way she managed everything with a sense of purpose he had never understood. By the time they finished the first section of the wing, Grant's arms ached, and sweat beaded on his forehead. He leaned against the wall, trying to catch his breath. This is ridiculous," he muttered, glancing at Lily. She shrugged, wiping her hands on her apron. "Welcome to my world, Grant. It's not glamorous, but it's real." Her words stung, but there was no malice in them, just a plain truth that he couldn't ignore. For the first time, Grant realized just how much he had taken his own life for granted, and how little he understood about people like Lily, people who worked hard every day without expecting anything in return. As the day dragged on, Grant struggled to keep up with the tasks, while Lily moved through them with practiced ease. He could see her stealing glances at him, as if trying to gauge whether he would crack under the pressure, and though his pride wouldn't let him quit, Grant felt a gnawing sense of frustration. This was not the life he was used to, and every muscle in his body resisted the new reality. By the end of the shift, he was exhausted in a way he had never been before, his hands raw from scrubbing and his back aching. But as he watched Lily leave the mansion, her head held high despite the weight of the day, Grant couldn't help but feel a strange, unfamiliar tug in his chest, something that almost felt like respect. He brushed the thought aside, still clinging to his anger and resentment. But as he headed home, he knew deep down that this was only the beginning of a journey he hadn't expected to take. Grant woke up the next morning with his muscles aching in places he hadn't known could ache. He lay in bed for a moment, contemplating the absurdity of his situation. Every fiber of his being told him to walk away, to defy his father's punishment, but he knew he couldn't afford to. The consequences, no more trust fund, no more luxury, were too severe. With a frustrated sigh, he pushed himself out of bed and got ready for another day in his new reality. By the time he reached the service entrance of the mansion, Lily was already there, waiting with her usual bag of cleaning supplies. She gave him a brief nod, acknowledging his presence but little else. There was no small talk, no attempt to make the situation more bearable. Grant felt the silence between them, thick and awkward, but he didn't know how to break it. Lily handed him his uniform without a word, and he changed quickly in the staff restroom, emerging in the plain work clothes that felt foreign against his skin. As he joined Lily in the hallway, he caught a glimpse of himself in the reflection of a polished glass cabinet, no longer the sharp-dressed heir, but just another worker with a mop and bucket. The sight stung his pride, but he swallowed the bitter feeling, knowing there was no turning back. "Let's start in the West Wing today," Lily said, leading the way. Her tone was professional, almost indifferent, and Grant found himself wishing she'd show even a hint of the contempt he knew she must feel. At least then, he could justify his anger. But she treated him like she did any other task, efficiently, without emotion. As they worked through the morning, Grant struggled to keep up. He fumbled with the vacuum cleaner, spilled cleaning solution on the marble floor, and nearly knocked over a vase. Each mistake earned him a quiet correction from Lily, but she never raised her voice or snapped at him. If anything, her patience only made him feel worse. "You don't have to hold back, you know," Grant muttered at one point, rubbing a sore spot on his wrist after nearly dropping a heavy bucket. "I'm sure you'd love to tell me off." Lily glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "And what good would that do?" she asked simply, then turned back to her work, leaving Grant to stew in his own thoughts. The hours dragged on, and Grant's initial resentment began to give way to a different kind of frustration, one directed at himself. He had always thought of physical labor as something beneath him, but now he realized just how physically demanding it was. His arms ached from scrubbing floors, and his back throbbed from bending over repeatedly. By noon, he was dripping with sweat, his hair sticking to his forehead. During their lunch break, they sat in the small staff room, where the other workers chatted and laughed among themselves, paying little attention to Grant. He ate in silence, glancing occasionally at Lily, who seemed perfectly at ease in this environment. She ate her simple sandwich with a calm focus, her mind clearly elsewhere. After a while, Grant couldn't help but ask, "How do you do it?" "Every day." Lily looked up, meeting his gaze with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "Do what?" "This," Grant gestured vaguely around them, indicating the cleaning supplies, the drab walls of the staff room, the hum of the break room refrigerator. "Work like this, day in, day out." She studied him for a moment before answering, as if deciding whether or not he deserved the truth. "Because I don't have a choice, Grant. My mom depends on me. And because, when you have people who need you, you find a way to keep going, no matter how hard it gets." Her words hit Grant harder than he expected, and he found himself unable to respond. He had never had to think that way, never had to face a reality where giving up wasn't an option. He realized, with a pang of guilt, that he had never really considered what it meant to struggle just to make it through each day. The afternoon brought more cleaning, dusting the chandeliers in the grand ballroom, vacuuming the plush carpets, polishing the ornate mirrors that lined the halls. Grant worked in silence, trying to push through the fatigue that weighed down his limbs. He kept glancing at Lily, watching how she moved with a steady rhythm, as if she had long since accepted the burdens he was only beginning to understand. As they finished up for the day, Grant leaned against the wall, catching his breath. "I didn't know it was this hard," he admitted quietly, surprising himself with the honesty of the statement. He hadn't meant to say it out loud, but the words had slipped out before he could stop them. Lily paused, looking at him with a hint of softness in her gaze. "It's not easy," she replied, "but it's life. You learn to deal with it." Grant nodded, unsure of what else to say. For a moment, they stood in a rare, unspoken understanding, neither of them entirely comfortable with the fragile truce that seemed to have formed. Lily picked up her bag, ready to leave, and Grant watched her go, feeling a strange sense of loss as she disappeared down the corridor. When he got home that evening, he was more exhausted than he had ever been in his life. He collapsed onto the couch, his mind racing with thoughts he couldn't quite organize. He thought about Lily's quiet determination, the way she carried herself with a dignity he had never noticed before. He thought about his own behavior, the way he had treated her, and for the first time, he felt something like genuine regret. But he wasn't ready to admit that out loud. Not yet. Instead, he forced himself to focus on the anger he still felt towards his father, the embarrassment of his situation, the humiliation of having to scrub floors when he had grown up with a silver spoon in his mouth. Still, as he drifted off to sleep, Grant couldn't shake the image of Lily standing tall despite everything she faced, and he couldn't help but wonder if there was more to this punishment than he had first thought. If maybe, just maybe, he had something to learn from it after all. The next morning, Grant woke up with the same dull ache in his muscles, but there was something different about his mindset. The resentment was still there, gnawing at him, but it was joined by a strange curiosity about Lily, about her life, about the world he had never bothered to see before. He didn't want to admit it. not even to himself. But he found himself wondering what else he might learn if he stopped resisting the situation. He arrived at the mansion's service entrance just as Lily was clocking in, her expression the same reserved calm she always wore. Without a word, she handed him the list of tasks for the day, and they set off to work. Grant tried to keep pace with her, determined not to fall behind again. They spent the morning cleaning the guest rooms in the East Wing. Grant found himself asking questions, not out of obligation, but because he genuinely wanted to know more. "So, your mom, she's been sick for a long time." Lily glanced at him, surprised by the sudden interest, but she answered without hesitation. "Yeah, it started a few years ago. At first it was just little things, fatigue, memory problems. But then it got worse, and the doctors said it's dementia. She needs round-the-clock care now." Grant fell silent, the weight of her words settling in. He had never known what it was like to watch a loved one suffer like that, to carry the burden of responsibility alone. The idea of sacrificing everything for someone else's well-being was foreign to him, yet it was Lily's reality every single day. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. And he meant it. He didn't know what else to say, but for once, he felt the need to acknowledge her struggle. Lily nodded, accepting his sympathy without pity. "It is what it is. I'm just trying to make sure she's comfortable and has what she needs. That's all I can do." The conversation left Grant feeling strangely unsettled. As they moved on to the next task, polishing the marble floors of the main hall, he found himself thinking about all the things he had taken for granted. He thought about the countless vacations his family had taken, the endless stream of parties, and the constant security of knowing that everything he needed was just a phone call away. He had never once worried about money, about paying bills, about where the next meal would come from. Meanwhile, Lily lived in a world where every dollar mattered, where a single missed paycheck could mean losing the roof over her head. She didn't have the luxury of dreaming about the future. She was too busy surviving the present. Later that day, as they took a break in the garden behind the mansion, Grant noticed Lily staring off into the distance, her expression lost in thought. He followed her gaze to a small playground on the edge of the property, a place where he and his friends had played as children. "Did you ever think about leaving this place?" he asked, breaking the silence. "Like, starting over somewhere else?" Lily let out a soft laugh, though there was no humor in it. "Sure, I've thought about it. Who hasn't? But starting over costs money, and I can't leave my mom. She needs me. So, no, I guess I've never really had that option." Grant nodded, a pang of guilt twisting in his chest. He couldn't imagine being tied down like that, having his choices dictated by something other than his own desires. And yet, there was a resilience in Lily that he couldn't help but admire, something he realized he had never possessed himself. As they resumed their work, Grant found himself watching Lily more closely, not out of judgment, but out of respect. He saw the way she moved with a quiet efficiency, how she managed to maintain a sense of pride even in tasks that most people would find demeaning. He realized that, despite everything, she had a strength that went beyond physical endurance. It was a strength of character, a resolve to keep going no matter how difficult things got. By the end of the day, Grant's hands were blistered, and his back ached from bending over for hours. He leaned heavily on the mop, wiping the sweat from his brow as he glanced at Lily. She was still working, her expression calm and steady, as if the physical toll meant nothing to her. "Does it ever get easier?" he asked, his voice rough with exhaustion. Lily paused, considering his question for a moment. "Not really, but you get used to it. And sometimes, you find small things that make it worth it, like knowing you've done a good job, or that you've made someone's day a little better." Grant nodded, trying to wrap his mind around the idea. It was so far from his own experience, from the way he had always measured success by the things he could buy or the places he could go. He realized that he had never understood what it meant to find meaning in something so simple. As they finished up for the day, Grant followed Lily out of the mansion, feeling a sense of weariness that was more than just physical. He had spent so much of his life focused on himself, on his own desires and ambitions, that he had never stopped to consider the lives of those around him. And now, for the first time, he was seeing the world through a different lens, one that made him question everything he thought he knew. When they reached the parking lot, Grant hesitated, then spoke up. "Hey, Lily, I know I don't deserve your trust, but thanks for not making this harder than it has to be." She turned to him, her expression softened by a hint of surprise. For a moment, she seemed to consider his words, as if weighing their sincerity. Then she gave him a small, almost reluctant smile. "Don't thank me yet, Grant. We still have a long way to go." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Grant standing alone in the fading light. He watched her disappear down the street, feeling a strange sense of admiration for the woman he had once dismissed so easily. And as he drove home that evening, the city lights blurring past the windows, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had already begun to change in ways he couldn't quite define. The following morning, Grant arrived at the mansion earlier than usual, his mind heavy with thoughts he hadn't been able to shake. The weight of the past few days had settled in, leaving him with a nagging sense of discomfort that he couldn't ignore. He had spent his whole life avoiding self-reflection, but now, confronted with the reality of Lily's struggles and his own thoughtless actions, he knew there was something he needed to do. As he changed into his uniform in the staff restroom, he rehearsed the words in his mind. It felt foreign to him, acknowledging his mistakes, admitting fault. But the more he thought about Lily's quiet strength, the more he realized he owed her a genuine apology. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. Lily was already in the East Wing, starting her morning routine when Grant found her. She glanced up briefly as he approached, then returned to her work, scrubbing the window panes with practiced precision. Grant felt his stomach twist with nerves, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. He cleared his throat, but the words caught, so he tried again. "Lily, can we talk for a minute?" he asked, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. She paused, glancing over her shoulder with a wary expression. "What is it, Grant? We've got a lot to get done today." Grant shifted awkwardly, rubbing the back of his neck. I know. It's just, I've been thinking about everything, and I realized I never really apologized for what I did. I mean, I know I've said sorry before, but I didn't really mean it. Not the way I should have." Lily straightened, turning to face him fully. Her expression was guarded, as if she wasn't sure whether to believe him. "Okay, so what's different now?" Grant swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her scrutiny. "What I did to you, it was wrong. I invited you to that dinner just to make fun of you, to feel like I was better than you. And that's messed up. I didn't see it before, but I do now. You're strong, and you're better than I ever gave you credit for. And I'm sorry, Lily. I really am." For a moment, there was only silence between them, the faint sound of the morning breeze drifting in through the open window. Grant felt exposed, like he had laid bare a part of himself that he'd kept hidden for too long. He half expected Lily to dismiss his words, to walk away without a second thought. But instead, she studied him, her expression softening just a fraction. "Do you really mean that?" she asked, her voice tinged with a hint of vulnerability. Grant nodded, his gaze unwavering. "Yeah, I do. I know it doesn't change what I did, but I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to be better, and that I'm sorry for everything I put you through." Lily held his gaze for a moment longer, as if searching for any sign of insincerity. Then she let out a slow breath, her shoulders relaxing slightly. "Thank you, Grant. It takes a lot to admit when you're wrong. I appreciate that, but that doesn't mean everything's fine between us. It's going to take time before I can trust you, you know?" Grant nodded again, feeling a sense of relief mixed with a pang of regret. "I get that. I don't expect you to just forgive me right away. I want to try and make things right, even if it takes a while." Lily offered him a small, cautious smile, a glimmer of something almost like understanding in her eyes. "Well, I guess we'll see how that goes. For now, let's just focus on getting through today." With that, she turned back to her work, and Grant felt a strange lightness in his chest. It wasn't quite forgiveness, but it was a start. He knew he had a long way to go, but for the first time, he felt like he was moving in the right direction. As the day went on, they worked side by side, the silence between them no longer feeling as strained as before. Grant made a conscious effort to keep up with the tasks, following Lily's lead and taking her advice without complaint. He could sense her watching him out of the corner of her eye, as if trying to gauge whether his newfound humility was real or just another act. During their lunch break, Grant found himself sitting across from Lily in the staff room. The other workers had gone out, leaving them alone in the quiet space. Grant hesitated, then decided to take a chance. "So, what did you dream of doing? Before all of this?" he asked, gesturing vaguely around them. Lily looked up, caught off guard by the question. She considered him for a moment, then shrugged lightly. "I used to want to be a teacher. Always liked helping people learn new things. But when my mom got sick, those plans had to change. Now, I just focus on making sure she's okay." Grant nodded slowly, feeling a pang of sadness for her unfulfilled dreams. He couldn't help but think of all the opportunities he'd taken for granted, all the times he'd dismissed the idea of hard work as something for other people. Maybe you'll get back to that someday," he offered, unsure if his words held any weight. Lily gave him a small, wistful smile. "Maybe, but for now, this is where I need to be." The conversation left Grant feeling strangely humbled. He realized that Lily's life had never been about chasing her own ambitions. It had always been about taking care of others, about putting her mother's needs before her own. It was a kind of selflessness that he had never understood, but now he found himself admiring her for it. As they finished their lunch and returned to work, Grant caught himself glancing at Lily from time to time, wondering how someone could remain so strong in the face of so much hardship. And though he still struggled with his own pride and resentment, he knew that something inside him had shifted. By the end of the day, when they parted ways at the mansion's service entrance, Grant felt a sense of cautious hope. Lily hadn't forgiven him completely, but she had given him a chance, something he hadn't expected. And as he watched her walk away, her steps steady and purposeful, he made a silent promise to himself. He would prove that he was worthy of that chance, no matter how long it took. As the weeks passed, the rhythm of work settled into a new normal for Grant and Lily. Grant no longer struggled as much with the physical demands of the job. His muscles had adapted, and his clumsiness had lessened. The grueling tasks that once filled him with resentment now felt strangely grounding. It wasn't that he enjoyed cleaning floors or scrubbing windows, but he found a certain satisfaction in the effort, in the act of seeing a job through to completion. Lily, for her part, had started to soften, though she kept her guard up. She no longer treated Grant with the cold distance she had when he first joined her on the job, and sometimes they even managed to share a few lighthearted moments. It wasn't friendship, not yet, but it was no longer outright hostility either. It was something in between, something tentative and fragile. One Friday afternoon, as they finished their shift, Lily turned to Grant and said, "I'm heading to the farmer's market tomorrow morning. They've got good deals on fresh produce. If you're interested, you can tag along." Grant blinked, surprised by the invitation. It was the first time Lily had offered him anything that resembled an olive branch. He hesitated, wondering if there was a catch. But then he saw the openness in her expression, a small sign that maybe she was starting to see him in a different light. "Yeah, sure, I could use some fresh air," he replied, trying to keep his tone casual. Lily nodded, giving him a faint smile before heading home. As Grant watched her walk away, he couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he was finally making progress. The next morning, Grant met Lily at the market, a bustling outdoor space filled with the colors and sounds of Charleston. Vendors shouted out deals on ripe tomatoes and fresh peaches, while families wandered between the stalls, their laughter mingling with the hum of conversation. the air was warm, with a hint of salt from the nearby coast. And for the first time in a while, Grant felt a sense of ease. He followed Lily through the market, watching as she haggled with the vendors with a confidence that he found both impressive and humbling. She showed him how to pick out the best apples, which stalls had the freshest greens, and how to spot a good deal. It was a world he had never thought to explore before, but now he found himself appreciating the simplicity of it all. At one point, they stopped by a food truck for lemonade, sitting together on a nearby bench as they sipped their drinks. Grant glanced at Lily, wondering how to ask the question that had been on his mind for weeks. "Why did you invite me today?" he asked finally, his voice low amidst the chatter around them. "I mean, after everything I've done. You didn't have to." Lily looked down at her lemonade, her expression thoughtful. "You're right. I didn't have to. But I've seen you trying, Grant. You're not the same person you were that night in the restaurant. And I guess I believe that people can change if they really want to." Grant swallowed, the sincerity of her words cutting through his defenses. He thought back to all the times he had dismissed the idea of change, believing that people were who they were. But here he was, sitting beside the woman he had once tried to humiliate, realizing that maybe he had been wrong. "Thank you, Lily, for giving me a chance," he said, his voice uncharacteristically earnest. "I know I've got a lot to make up for, but it means a lot." Lily glanced at him, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. "Just don't mess it up, okay? I'm not offering second chances lightly." They shared a quiet laugh, and for a moment, the tension between them seemed to lift. As they walked back through the market, Grant found himself enjoying the simple pleasure of being in Lily's company, free from the weight of past mistakes. In the weeks that followed, Grant continued to work alongside Lily, but he also found himself taking more interest in her life outside of the mansion. One evening, after a particularly long shift, he offered to walk her home. At first, she declined, but when he insisted, she relented with a sigh. Their route took them through the older part of town, where the houses were smaller and closer together, their paint faded by years of sun and salt air. Lily's neighborhood was a far cry from the gated community where Grant had grown up, but there was a warmth to it, a sense of community that he had never experienced before. As they walked, Lily pointed out the local diner where she used to work before taking the job at the mansion, the corner store that still gave her credit when times were tough, and the small park where she sometimes sat with her mother on good days. Grant listened quietly, absorbing the details of a life that was so different from his own. When they reached her front porch, Lily turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "You didn't have to walk me all the way here, you know." Grant shrugged, offering her a half smile. "Yeah, well, I figured it was the least I could do." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Thanks, Grant. I'll see you tomorrow." As Grant made his way back through the quiet streets, he felt a warmth in his chest that he couldn't quite define. It wasn't love, at least not yet, but it was something like connection. A sense that he was finally starting to understand what it meant to care about someone beyond himself. Their dynamic at work continued to shift, and Grant noticed that the other staff members no longer eyed him with the same suspicion they once had. He had earned a modicum of respect, not just from Lily, but from the entire team. He was far from perfect. He still made mistakes, and sometimes his old arrogance threatened to creep back in, but he was trying, and people could see that. One afternoon, as they cleaned the library, Grant found himself asking Lily about her mother again. "Do you ever get scared?" he asked, his voice quiet in the stillness of the room. "About what's going to happen?" Lily paused, dusting a shelf lined with old books. "Yeah, I do. Every day, honestly. But I don't let myself think about it too much. It's just one day at a time, you know?" Grant nodded, feeling a deep respect for the way she faced her fears head-on. He knew he had never had to deal with that kind of uncertainty, and he wondered how he would have handled it if their situations were reversed. Probably not as well as Lily, he realized. As the weeks turned into months, Grant and Lily found themselves sharing more of these quiet, intimate moments, each of them learning to trust the other in ways they never expected. And though they still had a long way to go, Grant couldn't help but feel that they were building something real, something that might just survive the shadows of the past. Grant's life had settled into a rhythm he never thought possible. Every morning, he would arrive at the mansion before sunrise, change into his uniform, and begin his shift alongside Lily. The tasks that once felt like drudgery had become almost meditative, a way to quiet the noise in his head. But it was the time spent with Lily that had made the biggest impact, slowly chipping away at the walls he'd built around himself. One chilly morning, as they scrubbed the tiles in one of the mansion's lesser-used bathrooms, Grant couldn't hold back the thoughts that had been swirling in his mind. He paused mid-scrub, resting on his knees, and turned to Lily with a serious expression. "Lily, can I ask you something?" he ventured, his voice sounding unusually tentative. She glanced at him, wiping a stray strand of hair from her face with the back of her gloved hand. "Sure, what's up?" Grant hesitated, feeling the weight of his own emotions pressing down on him. Do you think people can really change? Like, deep down?" Lily paused, considering his question. She leaned back on her heels, her expression thoughtful. "I think people can change if they really want to, but it's not easy. You have to face the parts of yourself that you don't like. And that's tough. Most people don't have the guts to do it." Her words hung in the air, and Grant felt the truth of them cut through him. He thought back to the person he'd been, arrogant, selfish, convinced that his wealth made him better than everyone else. It was a version of himself that he had never questioned before. But now, in the quiet moments between tasks, he found himself picking apart those old assumptions. "I think I'm trying," he said quietly, more to himself than to Lily. I don't want to be that person anymore." Lily looked at him, her expression softening as she saw the sincerity in his face. "I can see that you're trying, Grant. But you need to be patient, with yourself and with others. Change takes time." Grant nodded, letting her words sink in. He knew she was right, but the journey ahead felt daunting. He had spent his whole life thinking that success meant power and wealth, but now he was starting to see the emptiness behind those beliefs. For the first time, he wondered if maybe there was a different kind of success, one that had nothing to do with money or status. That afternoon, as they finished cleaning the grand staircase, Grant caught himself watching Lily as she worked, noticing the small things he'd never paid attention to before. The way she hummed quietly under her breath, the way her face softened when she talked about her mother. He realized with a jolt that he admired her, not just for her strength, but for the way she had managed to hold on to her kindness despite everything life had thrown at her. And beneath that admiration, he felt something else, something that had been growing slowly like a seed planted in his heart. It was a feeling he hadn't allowed himself to acknowledge before. But now, in the stillness of the empty mansion, he couldn't deny it any longer. He was falling for Lily. The realization hit him like a wave, washing over him with a mixture of hope and fear. He knew that he had no right to expect her to feel the same way, not after everything he'd done. But he couldn't ignore the way his heart beat faster when she smiled at him, or the way he found himself looking forward to their conversations, even when they were just talking about mundane things. As they gathered their supplies to head home, Grant struggled to find the right words. He wanted to tell Lily how much she had changed him, how much he admired her, but every time he opened his mouth, the words died on his lips, swallowed by his own uncertainty. Instead, he found himself blurting out, "Hey, do you want to grab coffee sometime? You know, outside of work?" Lily stopped, turning to him with a surprised look. "Coffee?" "Yeah, like, just to talk. Or not talk. Whatever you want," Grant said quickly, feeling heat creep up the back of his neck. He realized how awkward he sounded, but he forced himself to meet her gaze. Lily studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, to his surprise, a small smile tugged at the corner of her lips. "Okay, Grant, Coffee sounds nice. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, a relieved grin spreading across his face. Really? Great. I'll find a place. Somewhere nice. Lily shook her head, her smile turning wry. It doesn't have to be fancy, Grant. Just a regular coffee shop is fine. Grant chuckled, feeling a rush of warmth in his chest. Got it. No fancy stuff. As they parted ways that evening, Grant couldn't stop the smile that lingered on his face. It was just coffee, just a simple invitation, but it felt like something more. It felt like a chance to show Lily the person he was trying to become. Over the next few days, Grant found himself thinking more and more about Lily, about the way she had become a steady presence in his life. He found himself wanting to make her laugh, wanting to see her smile. He knew that it was a long shot, that she might never fully forgive him for the way he had treated her. But for the first time, he felt like he was willing to take that risk. On the day of their coffee outing, Grant put on a simple button-down shirt and jeans, trying to strike a balance between casual and presentable. He arrived at the small cafe near the waterfront a little early, his nerves fluttering in his chest as he waited for Lily to arrive. When she walked in, wearing a casual jacket and her hair pulled back, Grant felt a warmth spread through him. She looked different outside of work, more relaxed, more herself. They ordered their drinks and found a quiet table by the window, where they could watch the boats drifting by on the harbor. At first, the conversation was a little stilted, both of them unsure of how to navigate this new dynamic. But gradually, they fell into a rhythm, talking about everything from childhood memories to their favorite books. Grant found himself laughing at Lily's dry humor, and she seemed to relax, letting down her guard just a little. By the time they finished their drinks, the sun was setting over the water, casting a warm glow through the cafe windows. Grant realized he didn't want the evening to end, but he knew he couldn't rush things. He had to take it slow to earn Lily's trust, bit by bit. As they walked out of the cafe, Grant turned to her, his heart pounding in his chest. Thanks for today, Lily. I really enjoyed it. She smiled up at him, her expression softer than he'd ever seen it. Me too, Grant. Maybe we can do it again sometime. He nodded, feeling a flicker of hope in his chest. Yeah, I'd like that. As they went their separate ways, Grant couldn't help but feel that something had shifted between them, something small but meaningful. He knew he had a long way to go, but for the first time, he felt like there might be a future worth working toward. And as he walked back through the quiet streets, he found himself smiling at the thought of what that future might hold. Grant's life continued to change in ways he hadn't imagined. Working with Lily and spending time outside of their shifts made him feel like he was discovering a new side of himself, one that wasn't defined by money or status. He began to realize that he enjoyed the simplicity of their conversations, the way Lily made him see the world differently. But just as he was beginning to embrace this new chapter, the past reared its head in a way that he couldn't ignore. One afternoon, after finishing their shift at the mansion, Grant was surprised to find a few of his old friends waiting for him in the parking lot. They leaned casually against expensive cars, their designer sunglasses gleaming in the afternoon sun. Grant hadn't seen them in weeks, and a part of him was taken aback by how different they seemed to him now. "Hey, Grant, long time no see," one of them, Kyle, called out with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "We thought you'd forgotten all about us." Grant forced a smile, though he felt a knot of unease in his stomach. "Yeah, I've been busy." The others exchanged knowing smirks, glancing at Lily, who was standing a few feet away, watching the scene unfold with a wary expression. Grant could sense her hesitation, the way she kept her distance as if expecting the worst. He couldn't blame her. She had seen the way his friends treated her at the restaurant, and she had every reason to be cautious. One of the guys, Eric, let out a low chuckle. "Busy playing janitor, huh? Man, I gotta say, when we heard about your dad's little punishment, we thought it was a joke." Kyle nodded, his tone mocking. "Yeah, but look at you, Grant. Really committed to the role, huh? Cleaning floors and hanging out with the help. Who would have thought?" Grant's hands clenched into fists at his sides, but he forced himself to stay calm. He could feel Lily's eyes on him, waiting to see how he would respond. He took a deep breath, then met his friend's gaze squarely. Yeah, I am committed to it, and you know what? I'm learning a lot, more than I ever did partying with you guys. The smirks faded, replaced by looks of confusion and annoyance. Kyle crossed his arms, his expression hardening. Come on, Grant. Don't tell me you're actually buying into this whole lesson in humility thing. We're your real friends, man. We're the ones who've got your back. Grant shook his head, feeling a surge of frustration. Really? Because it doesn't feel that way. It feels like you're here to make fun of me, just like we used to make fun of people like Lily. But that's not who I want to be anymore. Eric scoffed, rolling his eyes. Whatever, man. If you want to throw away your life for some sob story, go ahead. But don't expect us to wait around for you. Grant opened his mouth to respond, but before he could say anything, Lily stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension. You know, it's funny. For people who call themselves his friends, you sure don't seem to respect his choices. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, there was a stunned silence. Grant's friends stared at Lily as if seeing her for the first time, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and disdain. Kyle let out a derisive laugh, but there was an edge of uncertainty to it. And who do you think you are, huh? You think you're better than us just because you got Grant doing this charity project with you? Lily met his gaze unflinchingly. No, I don't think I'm better than anyone, but I know what it's like to work for what you have. And I know that Grant is trying to be better. Maybe you should try doing the same. Grant felt a rush of gratitude and something deeper, something that made his chest tighten. He had never seen anyone stand up for him like that, least of all someone he had hurt so deeply in the past. He turned to Lily, catching her eye, and gave her a small, grateful nod. She returned it, her expression steady, though he could see the tension in her shoulders. Kyle and the others exchanged glances, clearly unsettled by the shift in the dynamic. Finally, Eric shrugged, a sneer curling his lips. Whatever, let's get out of here. If Grant wants to waste his time, that's his problem. Without another word, they climbed into their cars, the engines roaring as they sped out of the parking lot. Grant watched them go, a strange mix of relief and sadness settling in his chest. He knew he had lost something, some connection to his old life, but he also felt lighter, as if a weight he hadn't realized he was carrying had been lifted. Lily turned to him, her expression softer now. You didn't have to do that, you know. Stand up to them like that. Grant shrugged, letting out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Yeah, I did. It's about time I stopped pretending that the person I was with them was okay. They stood in silence for a moment, the parking lot empty around them, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the pavement. Then Lily reached out and gave his arm a light, reassuring squeeze. Well, I appreciate it. For what it's worth, I think you're doing a good job, being a better person. Grant met her gaze, feeling a warmth spread through him at her words. Thanks, Lily. That means a lot coming from you. They left the mansion together, walking side by side down the quiet streets. Grant found himself talking more freely than he had in years, sharing stories about his childhood, his relationship with his father, and the pressure he had always felt to live up to the Thomas name. Lily listened with quiet understanding, offering her own stories in return, stories of her mother's strength, the struggles they had faced, and the small joys she had found along the way. As they walked, Grant realized how much he valued these moments, the way Lily made him feel like he could be honest without judgment. He knew he had made mistakes, plenty of them, but with each step, he felt like he was moving closer to becoming the person he wanted to be. But beneath the surface, a new fear had begun to grow. He knew he was falling for Lily, that his feelings for her had become more than admiration or respect. He also knew that if he told her how he felt, he risked ruining the fragile trust they had built. And as much as he wanted to believe that he deserved a second chance, a part of him still feared that he wasn't good enough, that he would never truly be able to make up for the hurt he had caused. By the time they reached Lily's front porch, the sky had turned a deep shade of purple, and the first stars were beginning to appear. Lily turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "Thanks for walking with me, Grant. It's nice to have someone to talk to." Grant smiled, feeling a tightness in his chest that he couldn't quite name. "Yeah, it is. I'm glad we're doing this, whatever this is." Lily raised an eyebrow, a teasing glint in her eyes. "You mean scrubbing floors and dealing with your obnoxious friends?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "Yeah, something like that." They stood there for a moment, neither of them wanting to break the silence, but eventually, Lily gave him a small wave and disappeared inside, leaving Grant standing on the porch with a heart full of unspoken words. As he walked back through the quiet streets, Grant knew that he was at a crossroads. He could keep pretending that this was just about making up for his mistakes, or he could take a risk and be honest with Lily about how he truly felt. The thought scared him, but it also made him feel more alive than he had in years. And as he made his way home, Grant found himself hoping that maybe, just maybe, there was a future where he and Lily could build something real, something that wasn't tied to the past, but to the person he was becoming. Grant knew he couldn't keep pretending forever. The change in him was real, but he also realized that it needed to be seen by more than just Lily. If he wanted to prove to himself, and to her, that he was serious about becoming a better person, he needed to take action beyond the walls of the mansion. That's why, a few weeks later, he approached Richard in his office with a proposal. Grant felt his nerves churn as he stood in front of his father's imposing oak desk, but he forced himself to hold Richard's gaze. "Dad, I have an idea," he began, keeping his voice steady. "I want to organize a charity event, something to give back to the community, to help the people who don't have the same advantages we do." Richard looked up from his paperwork, raising an eyebrow. "A charity event? That's a bit of a departure from your usual interests, Grant. What brought this on?" Grant hesitated, knowing he had to be honest. "I've seen how hard Lily works, how much she sacrifices for her mom. And I've realized that there are so many people like her who could use a little support. I want to do something that matters for a change." Richard studied his son, his expression inscrutable. For a long moment, Grant feared that his father would dismiss the idea, but then Richard leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful look crossing his face. "All right, Grant, I'll support this, on one condition. You have to plan the whole thing yourself, no relying on the staff to do it for you. If you want to prove that this is important to you, you'll have to see it through from start to finish." Grant nodded, feeling a mix of relief and determination. "I can do that. I want to do it." Over the next few weeks, Grant threw himself into organizing the charity event. He spent his mornings working alongside Lily at the mansion and his afternoons making phone calls, arranging for donations, and coordinating with local businesses. He reached out to community centers, youth programs, and food banks, trying to understand what they needed most and how he could help. Lily watched his efforts with a mixture of curiosity and admiration. She had never seen this side of Grant before, the side that was willing to put in the hard work, that cared about making a difference. One evening, as they finished cleaning up after a long day, she found herself asking, "So, what's the plan for this big event of yours?" Grant smiled, a little shyly, as if he still wasn't used to talking about something he felt proud of. "It's going to be a fundraiser and a community fair, live music, food stalls, games for kids, that sort of thing. And all the money we raise will go to local charities, especially ones that help families like yours." Lily raised an eyebrow, impressed. "That's actually really thoughtful, Grant. I didn't expect you to go all out like this." He shrugged, trying to downplay the flush of pride he felt at her approval. "Well, I guess I'm just trying to make up for lost time. And I want you to be there, Lily. It wouldn't feel right without you." Lily hesitated, clearly touched but unsure. "I don't know, Grant. I don't think I'd really fit in at an event like that. It's more your world, not mine." Grant shook his head, his expression earnest. No, it's not. Not anymore. This is about more than just my world or yours. It's about bringing people together, and I'd like you to be a part of that. After a long pause, Lily finally nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. All right, I'll come, but you better not make me regret it. The day of the event arrived, and Grant was a bundle of nerves. He had never organized anything on this scale before, and as he looked around the venue, a local park filled with stalls, tents, and a small stage, he couldn't help but worry that something would go wrong. But as the sun began to set and people started arriving, he felt a surge of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this would work. Lily showed up a little after the event had started, wearing a simple dress and a hesitant smile. Grant spotted her from across the park, and his heart lifted at the sight of her. He made his way over, weaving through the crowd, and greeted her with a warm smile. You made it, he said, feeling more relief than he cared to admit. Lily chuckled, giving him a mock stern look. Yeah, I'm here, and it looks like you've done a pretty good job too. The place is packed. Grant glanced around, seeing the families enjoying the games, the kids running around with faces painted, and the local bands playing on stage. He couldn't help but feel a swell of pride at how everything had come together. Yeah, I think we might actually pull this off. As the evening went on, Grant and Lily wandered through the fair together, stopping at food stalls and chatting with some of the people who had come to support the event. Grant introduced Lily to a few of the local business owners who had donated supplies, and she, in turn, introduced him to some of the families she knew from her neighborhood. It was a strange, wonderful blend of their two worlds, and Grant couldn't help but feel like it was exactly what he had hoped for. When the time came for the main announcement, Grant took the stage, his heart pounding in his chest. He looked out at the crowd, spotting Richard in the back, his expression serious but proud. He spotted Lily too, standing closer to the front, her arms crossed as she watched him with a small, encouraging smile. Grant cleared his throat, speaking into the microphone. I just want to thank everyone for coming tonight. This event means a lot to me, and I hope it means a lot to you too. When I started planning this, I wanted it to be about more than just raising money. I wanted it to be about showing that we all have a responsibility to look out for each other, no matter where we come from. He paused, glancing toward Lily, and for a moment, their eyes met. He could see the understanding in her gaze, the unspoken acknowledgement of how far they had both come. And I want to say that this event wouldn't have been possible without the help and inspiration of a friend who's taught me more than I ever thought I'd learn. So, thank you. The crowd applauded, and Grant felt a wave of emotion swell inside him. As he stepped off the stage, Lily met him with a quiet smile, her eyes bright with something that looked almost like pride. That was really nice, Sir Grant. You did good. Grant felt his heart lift at her words. Thanks, Lily. That means more than you know. As the event wound down and the final donations were counted, Grant and Lily found themselves sitting together on a bench, watching the last of the families trickle out of the park. The night air was cool, and the stars were just starting to peek through the darkening sky. Grant turned to Lily, feeling a nervous flutter in his chest. Lily, I know I've said it before, but I really am sorry for everything. And I just want you to know that no matter what happens, I'm going to keep trying to be better. Lily met his gaze, her expression serious but gentle. I believe you, Grant. And I think you've come a long way. But remember, it's not just about proving yourself to me or to anyone else. It's about being the person you want to be, for you. Her words struck a chord deep inside him, and Grant nodded, feeling a lump rise in his throat. Yeah, you're right. Thank you, Lily, for everything. They sat there in comfortable silence for a while longer, watching as the park emptied out and the night settled around them. And though Grant still didn't know what the future held, he felt a sense of peace, a sense that maybe, for the first time in his life, he was on the right path. As the weeks passed after the charity event, Grant couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to tell Lily how he truly felt. His days working alongside her had become more than just a lesson in humility. They had become the highlight of his life. He found himself looking forward to the simple moments they shared, the quiet conversations and unspoken understanding that had grown between them. But the fear of rejection gnawed at him, keeping his feelings locked inside. One cool October evening, after another long day of work, Grant asked Lily if she would join him for a walk along the waterfront. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the water, and the air carried a hint of the coming winter. Lily hesitated, but then she nodded, curiosity flickering in her eyes. "Sure, Grant. What's on your mind?" They walked in silence for a while, the only sound the soft lapping of the waves against the shore. Grant's heart pounded in his chest as he searched for the right words, feeling the weight of everything he wanted to say pressing down on him. Finally, he stopped and turned to face her, taking a deep breath. "Lily, I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, and there's something I need to tell you. I know that I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I don't expect you to feel the same way, but I've fallen for you." Lily's eyes widened, surprise flashing across her face. Grant rushed to fill the silence, his voice growing more urgent. "I know I've made a lot of mistakes, and I know that I'm still figuring things out, but I've never felt this way before. Being with you, learning from you, it's changed me, Lily. And I needed you to know that." For a moment, the world seemed to stand still, the air thick with unspoken words. Lily stared at him, her expression unreadable, and Grant felt his chest tighten with fear. Had he ruined everything? Had he pushed too far? Too fast? Lily took a deep breath, her voice soft but steady. "Grant, I don't know what to say. I didn't expect this. And I don't know if I'm ready for something like this. There's still a lot between us that I need time to process." Grant nodded quickly, trying to hide the sting of disappointment. "I get it, Lily, I really do. And I don't want to pressure you into anything. I just wanted to be honest with you, for once in my life." She looked at him for a long moment, then reached out and gently squeezed his hand. "Thank you, Grant, for being honest. It means a lot to me, but I need time to figure out what I'm feeling, and time to see if this change in you is real." Grant swallowed hard, forcing himself to smile. "Take all the time you need, Lily. I'm not going anywhere." They continued their walk, the conversation shifting to lighter topics, but the unspoken tension lingered between them. Grant could sense the uncertainty in Lily's voice, the way she kept her emotions carefully guarded. He knew he couldn't rush her, but a part of him ached with the fear that he might never win her over completely. The next day at work, the awkwardness between them was palpable, but they both tried to push through it, focusing on their tasks and avoiding the subject of Grant's confession. As the afternoon wore on, Grant's anxiety gnawed at him, and he found himself longing for a distraction, something to take his mind off the uncertainty of where he stood with Lily. But that distraction came in a form he hadn't anticipated. As they were finishing up in the East Wing, Grant spotted Richard walking down the hallway toward them, his expression grim. Grant's stomach tightened, wondering what could have brought his father to the mansion at this hour. "Grant, we need to talk," Richard said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He cast a glance at Lily, his expression softening slightly. "Lily, do you mind giving us a moment?" Lily nodded, casting a worried look at Grant before slipping away down the hall. Grant turned back to his father, bracing himself for whatever was coming. "What's this about, Dad?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Richard crossed his arms, his gaze piercing. "I've been hearing rumors, Grant. People talking about how you've been spending more time with Lily, how you've grown close to her. Is there any truth to that?" Grant felt a flash of frustration, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Yes, there is. I care about her, Dad. She's made me realize things about myself that I never would have seen otherwise." Richard's frown deepened, a rare hint of emotion breaking through his stern demeanor. "Grant, I need you to understand what's at stake here. Lily is a good person, and I'm glad that she's been a positive influence on you. But you need to think carefully about what you're doing. This isn't some game." Grant shook his head, feeling his anger rise. "I know it's not a game, Dad. That's the whole point. I'm serious about her. I want to be the kind of person who deserves her." Richard sighed, his shoulders sagging slightly. "I believe you, son. But you need to understand that this isn't just about you and Lily anymore. There are people in this town. Our old friends, our business partners who won't accept this. They'll question your motives, and hers too." Grant felt his jaw tighten, the familiar pressure of his old life pushing in on him. He knew that his father was right, that the people they associated with wouldn't understand. But he also knew that he couldn't go back to being the person he had been before. "Let them talk," he said, his voice firm. "I don't care what they think. I care about doing what's right, and I care about Lily." Richard stared at him for a long moment, then let out a heavy sigh. "You've grown up, Grant, more than I thought possible. If this is really what you want, then I'll support you. But just know that it won't be easy." Grant nodded, a weight lifting from his shoulders. "I know it won't be, but I think it'll be worth it." Richard clapped a hand on his shoulder, offering a rare smile. "Good. Now go talk to her. She's waiting for you." Grant found Lily in the courtyard, where she was sitting on a stone bench beneath the shade of an old oak tree. She looked up as he approached, her expression cautious but hopeful. "Hey," he said softly, taking a seat beside her. "My dad, he gave me a bit of a reality check, but he also said he'd support us if we decide that this is what we want." Lily studied him, her eyes searching his face. "And what do you want, Grant?" Grant took a deep breath, meeting her gaze. "I want to be with you, Lily. I want to keep trying to be the person you helped me see I could be. And I want to earn your trust, however long that takes." For a moment, there was only silence, the breeze rustling the leaves above them. Then Lily reached out, slipping her hand into his. Her grip was firm, her expression serious but softened by something that looked like hope. "Okay, Grant," she said quietly. "Let's see where this goes. But we take it slow. One day at a time." Grant felt his heart swell, a grin breaking across his face. "One day at a time, I can do that." They sat there together as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. And for the first time, Grant felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be, not because of who he was, but because of who he was becoming. The days that followed were filled with a sense of cautious hope. Grant and Lily continued to work side by side, their relationship slowly shifting into something more, though they remained careful not to rush things. They spoke often about their pasts, their fears, and their hopes for the future. And with each conversation, Grant felt the walls around his heart crumble a little more. But not everything was easy. True to Richard's warning, whispers about Grant and Lily's relationship began to spread through Charleston's high society. At first, it was subtle, glances from acquaintances, comments that lingered on the edge of civility. But soon, the gossip grew louder, and Grant found himself facing the disapproval of people he had once considered friends. One afternoon, as Grant and Lily took a break in the garden behind the mansion, she brought up the rumors with a pensive look. "I heard some of the staff talking earlier. They were saying that some of your old friends aren't happy about us." Grant shrugged, trying to downplay the sting he felt at the thought of those he had once trusted turning against him. "Yeah, I figured that might happen. But honestly, I don't care what they think anymore. I've spent too much of my life worrying about people who only liked me for my last name. I care about you, Lily. That's all that matters." Lily studied him for a moment, then reached out and gently touched his arm. "You know, you don't have to fight this alone. We're in this together." Grant's chest tightened at her words, a warmth spreading through him that he hadn't felt in a long time. He placed his hand over hers, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "I know, and that makes all the difference." The weeks turned into a rhythm that felt almost natural. Grant continued his work at the mansion, earning the respect of the other staff members through his efforts and humility. He found himself taking pride in the simple things, making sure a room was spotless, helping Lily with tasks that required a little more strength. And with each passing day, he felt more at home in this new life than he ever had in the world of luxury and privilege. One evening, after finishing their shift, Grant and Lily walked down to the beach together. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the waves, and the air was cool and crisp. They sat on the sand, listening to the rhythmic sound of the ocean, and Grant felt a sense of peace settle over him. He turned to Lily, watching the way the light played across her face. And he knew he needed to say something that had been weighing on his mind for weeks. "Lily, I know we agreed to take things slow, but I just want you to know that I'm all in. Whatever this becomes, wherever it goes, I'm ready for it, and I'll wait as long as you need." Lily looked at him, her eyes reflecting the colors of the sunset, and he saw a mixture of emotions there: hope, uncertainty, and a flicker of something deeper. "Grant, you've come a long way, and I can see that you're trying, that you've changed, but I need you to understand that trust isn't something that comes back easily." Grant nodded, reaching out to take her hand. "I know, and I don't want you to feel like you have to rush into anything. I'm grateful for the chance to be by your side, even if it takes time for you to trust me completely." Lily squeezed his hand gently, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Well, you're doing a pretty good job so far, and I like this new you, Grant. I like the person you're becoming." They sat there for a long time, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. And in that moment, Grant realized that he was exactly where he wanted to be. Not just with Lily, but with himself. He had spent so much of his life trying to fit into a mold that had never truly suited him. But now, he felt like he was finally becoming someone he could be proud of. The next morning, Richard called Grant into his office for a conversation. Grant entered, feeling a sense of calm that he hadn't felt in months. Richard looked up from his desk, offering a rare smile. "You've surprised me, Grant," Richard said, leaning back in his chair. "When I first gave you this task, I wasn't sure you'd take it seriously, but I've seen the change in you, and I want you to know that I'm proud of you." Grant felt a lump form in his throat at his father's words. "Thanks, Dad. That means a lot." Richard nodded, then grew more serious. "I know you've been facing some challenges with people in town, old friends who don't understand the choices you've made. But I want you to know that you have my support. If they can't accept the person you're becoming, then maybe they were never really your friends in the first place." Grant smiled, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. "I think I'm finally starting to realize that, and honestly, I'm okay with it." As he left the office, Grant felt a sense of closure that he hadn't known he needed. He walked through the halls of the mansion, remembering the person he had been when this all started. Arrogant, selfish, convinced that he was better than the people around him. But now, he knew that real strength wasn't about looking down on others. It was about lifting them up. Later that evening, he and Lily sat together on the back porch of the mansion, watching the stars come out one by one. Lily leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder, and Grant felt a warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with the cool night air. "You know, I used to think that my life would never change," Lily said softly, her voice carrying a note of wonder. "That I'd be stuck in the same routine, just trying to make it through each day. But I think maybe things are starting to look up." Grant smiled, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Yeah, I think they are, and I'm glad I get to be a part of that." They stayed like that for a long time, the world around them fading into the background. And as the night deepened, Grant felt a sense of hope and possibility that he had never known before. The next few months brought new challenges, but also new joys. Grant continued to balance his work at the mansion with volunteering at local community centers, finding fulfillment in helping those who needed it most. Lily's mother's condition stabilized, allowing Lily to spend more time exploring her old dream of becoming a teacher, even taking night classes to work toward her goal. And through it all, their relationship grew stronger, built on a foundation of honesty, respect, and the understanding that neither of them had to be perfect. They just had to keep trying. One evening, as they walked hand in hand through the streets of Charleston, Grant looked at Lily, feeling a surge of gratitude for the way she had changed his life. "I know I've said it 100 times, but thank you, Lily, for giving me a chance, for believing that I could be more than the person I used to be." Lily squeezed his hand, a soft smile lighting up her face. "You've more than earned that chance, Grant. And I'm glad I took a chance on you too." They paused by the waterfront, looking out over the city that had once felt so small to them both, but now seemed filled with endless possibilities. And as they stood there, with the future stretching out before them, Grant knew that they had both found something more than they had ever expected. Something that went beyond redemption or second chances. They had found each other,